Let's talk supply chain. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Let's Talk Supply Chain. So, before we start, I have a little brain teaser to get you thinking. Now, supply chain sustainability is an advantage, not a cost burden, yet many organizations are still struggling to integrate sustainable practices into their operations. So, according to a total economic impact study by Forrester, what percentage could implementing sustainability focused supply chain actions reduce labor costs for supply chain sustainability management? Wow, that was a mouthful. It's got to be fairly high percentage, but what do you think? Let me know your guesses over on social and keep listening because all will be revealed at the end of the show. So today, I'm excited to welcome an industry's trailblazer to our Woman in Supply Chain series. She spent her entire career specializing in deep sustainability. And who is she? Well, it's Saskia. Now, Saskia is an environmental scientist with 18 years of experience in sustainability, working across consumer products, retail, government, and manufacturing. Now serving as the chief sustainability officer at Blue Yonder, Saskia is responsible for developing and executing their sustainability strategy and driving key initiatives across the country. So now we're going to be talking today all about her career journey, the biggest supply chain sustainability challenges and opportunities right now, her experience as a woman moving through the industry, and what being a trailblazer means to her. Now, we cannot have this Woman in Supply Chain series without our sponsor. The Woman in Supply Chain Forum was created by Marina Mayer and Jason DeSearle to foster real connections, bringing men and women together to network, learn, and build lasting bonds beyond traditional conferences. It's about strengthening pipelines, creating a community of advocates, mentors, and trusted peers. Similarly, the Woman in Supply Chain Award was born from a need to recognize female leaders navigating challenges and driving change. Since its inception 5 years ago, it has grown to nearly 400 submissions, celebrating the achievements of women shaping the future of supply chain. Find out more at sdcexec.com. So, welcome to the show, Saskia.
Thank you, Sarah. So excited for the conversation today.
I am so happy to have you here. Like, you are another supply and demand chain executives, Woman in Supply Chain award winners. I've been interviewing an incredible cross section of winners since the awards were announced at the end of last year. And I really have been having a blast. I'm so grateful to get to talk to so many inspirational women, and I'm excited to talk to you today. I mean, I love to talk about sustainability and doing my research for the show. It's clear that you are the woman to talk to. So, you have an environmental science degree. So, you were always interested, I believe, in sustainability and ecological issues. Where did that come from? Talk to us about this.
Yeah, it's funny because it's something that I have been interested in since I was a little kid. And I was definitely one of those country girls who climbed trees and was always running around in rivers. And I just had that in my backyard. I grew up in a small town in Northeast Texas, and that's kind of what we did. We got on our bikes and got out into
Mhm.
nature. So from a young age, I think I've always felt a connection to nature. And it wasn't until I was in high school, I did competitive debate. And that one of the years, the debate topic was all about renewable energy and the environment and the
Huh.
impact of technology and innovation in reducing fossil fuel emissions and carbon emissions from fossil fuels. And that's when a light switch turned on, where it was a translation from this passion that I felt for the environment to some of the practical things that we can do, whether it be policy changes or innovation that can come to really intercept the environmental impacts that were occurring. So from then on, I took on learning environmental science and studying it in different capacities. But as you said, it really started at a young age.
I love that. So it's kind of in your blood. It's like I always say supply chain is in my blood because I've been talking about it at the dinner table since I was 9 years old. So I
Amazing.
think it's kind of in your blood too, like the sustainability component.
It is. It is. I feel passionate about it, and I feel really optimistic that we have so many new tools at our fingertips that we didn't have when I was a kid.
It is so true. And there's so much more conversation about it. There's so much more to learn about it. It's kind of, exciting because I also feel like it's ever evolving. Like that topic is a little bit ever evolving. And it's interesting to see what people, our organizations are willing to do, willing to talk about, willing to pay for. So there's a lot of topics to talk about within sustainability. Now, you started your career at the US Environmental Protection Agency. You were there 2006 to 2013. So over a decade later, what do you think's changed? Like broadly, what are some of the biggest wins and where are the areas do you think that we're still maybe falling down, falling behind? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to look back, and even before I was at the EPA, what the genesis of the EPA was founded because our lakes and rivers were on fire at that moment because there was pollution that was getting into the Great Lakes, and an ignition would set them on fire. So it's important to take a long view. Yes, there's, as you said, there's lots that can be done, and we still have a lot of change that's needed, but we've also made a lot of progress. And it was really interesting and powerful to be a part of the EPA because you can see at a national level how much can be done, and where there was before a lot of legacy pollution from companies with no responsibility to clean up. Now we have a lot more of that accountability in place. So taking that long view, when I look back, especially in 2006, I think that's around the time that the movie An Inconvenient Truth came out. And a lot of people watched it and they learned the deep science of climate change and all the different drivers to it. And it became a little bit more of just, common conversation. You said you're talking about supply chain at the dinner table. All of a sudden, people that I knew were coming up to me and wondering, what's the deal with climate change? What are some of the, carbon taxes and policies? All of a sudden, those became a little bit more in common conversation. So I would say when you think about what's changed since 2013, there's been a lot more awareness around not just what climate change and global warming are, but what are the main causes for that? How do we affect it as a society? So, in terms of education and awareness, I think we're at a really high level. There's still a lot of action that needs to be done. And we've seen leadership, mostly from Europe, around different regulations that are requiring more accountability. Now there's carbon accounting standards that are on the same kind of credibility as financial accounting standards.
Right.
So we've really matured in how we're approaching some of these issues. The frameworks are becoming more consistent globally, so you can actually compare carbon emissions apples to apples. But I think when it comes to what we need to be doing more in the future is continuing to invest in innovation to mitigate climate change and make sure that we're not just relying on the private sector for continuing those investments.
Well, and I think it's probably been interesting for you to see who has been brought to the table over the years as well. Because I think it started with a certain part, maybe of the organization or certain people within an organization. And then, like you said, it sort of spread throughout the organization to be like, well, no, it actually affects every single component of an organization. We all need to come to the table and talk about what we're doing and how we can collaborate. But also, it probably gave you some insight into how much time it takes to actually move the needle.
Definitely. And well, I'm glad you raised the organizational changes because if I reflect back to 2006, the title of Chief Sustainability Officer really didn't exist.
No.
And it was even unusual for corporations to have sustainability teams. They may have philanthropic efforts where they're donating a percentage of profits to different initiatives. But the way that our current sustainability teams are structured, where you have leadership level sustainability positions, where you have executive responsibility to meet certain sustainability targets that's tied to compensation. That's an incredible journey along the maturity curve that's happened over the last decade.
Yeah. Well, and we have to recognize it, right? We've got to recognize how far we've come, even though it might seem like we still have so much to do and so far to go. So you then worked for around a decade, I believe, in retail businesses, Rothy's and Method. What were the biggest sustainability lessons you learned from the consumer market? And it's interesting how you went from that to the consumer market. And then, so you can get a really good, I'm sure you had a really good sense of how people thought and talked about sustainability kind of from both angles. So that's kind of fascinating for me. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, well, first, it was really fun to work for these brands that had really engaged consumer fan base, right?
Right.
These, I don't know if you've seen the fans that are following Rothy's or
Mhm.
Method, but they inspire love through the brands, and people become kind of collectors and follow, buying every new fragrance or following very closely when the new products are going to be launched because they become really just passionate around what those companies are doing. So I feel really fortunate that I got to work for those type of companies because it makes sustainability a little bit easier. You can engage the consumer directly because you have a really active consumer that's paying attention. They're often coming to the brand because sustainability is woven into that value proposition.
Right.
So you have beautiful design, wonderful quality, great smelling products in the case of Method, recycled materials in the case of Rothy's. And that inspires a deeper curiosity around, okay, what is really going on with this brand? So it was an opportunity to engage directly with those consumers, educate them, bring them along on our journey. Just a couple of things that come to mind. Like one was that we would take people into our factories and show them how we were manufacturing differently and give them tours. So you walk into the factory and immediately smells like lavender, and you're actually meeting the workforce that's building the products and packaging them up. And then
Mm.
Method had an incredible factory with greenhouses on the roof, wind turbines outside. We were
Wow.
doing local hiring to boost the local economy. So we really leverage that kind of behind the scene experience to engage consumers and bring them into a brand that they were already passionate about, and
Yeah.
using this sustainability as a way to really deepen their passion.
Wow, that's incredible. And talk about customer experience, right? This is something in supply chain that I do talk a lot about because supply chain has such a relevancy to customer experience in a variety of different ways. Obviously, not to that extent where we're building greenhouses on the top of the buildings, but for warehouse leaders and things like that that are looking for locations for warehouses, that could be a consideration as it could be part of their sustainability strategy as well. And it's all about innovation and creativity. And I feel like supply chain professionals and leaders need to have that creativity and that innovation to problem solve on a day-to-day basis. But this
Mm.
would also give them a way to be creative and innovative in a different way while also helping the environment as well. So that's such a cool experience. I love that you shared that with us.
Yeah,
So
it was a lot of fun, and it's a real gift to be able to be so in touch with the consumer because that's continued to inform the work that I've done since then.
yeah. So as a sustainability professional, I'm sure supply chain was always a bit of a key part of your focus. I mean, I just mentioned that they kind of go hand in hand because supply chain does need a sustainability component because we are one of the biggest contributors. But what made you jump into the industry with both feet and join Blue Yonder? And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's taken a hold and you won't be leaving the industry anytime soon. Because it does that to everybody.
Yes. Well, I think as exactly as you said, like the supply chain aspects of my role were always there because you can't deliver recycled packaging without looking at your suppliers, where you're getting those materials from, what is that full value chain. So there was always a touch point around supply chain within the roles that I had. But I think there's been a general awareness that supply chain is almost the last frontier, one of the last frontiers when it comes to addressing the embedded carbon emissions and waste that eventually make it to the consumer. And companies that really want to be responsible for all of their practices have to be looking to supply chain to make those differences. And a lot of those companies have also already addressed all of the immediate actions that they can take within their four walls. So, taking a factory as an example, they've probably looked at energy efficiency within the machinery and the lighting, probably looked at things like air quality in the factory and just everything that you can do within the boundaries of your four walls. And now, once those low hanging fruit has been addressed, we have to look to supply chain to continue to make those progress. So, I think the awareness, and I mentioned that we have a more sophisticated accounting for greenhouse gas emissions. So, if you think about scope 1 and scope 2 being within those four walls or things that you're directly in control of, and scope 3 being the value chain emissions through the supply chain, for most companies, the value chain scope 3 emissions are the biggest part of your footprint. So, if we're not addressing the elephant in the room, then we're really not making a difference.
Yeah, but also probably the most challenging, right? Because there are so many people involved in that.
Yes. Yes. And you lack that direct control. And that's part of the challenge is it's easier to make changes that you're seeing on a day-to-day basis and you're touching in real time. But if you're requiring a change from your immediate supplier or even the end-tier supplier, right? Like they could be 5 or 6 layers deep.
Yeah.
How do you have visibility into that? And how do you have influence over something that's so indirect?
Well, and also that influence is really around how much they are doing on their part to be able to contribute to sort of this really collaborative effort when it comes to sustainability. Because it's really going to take everybody, whether it's tier 1 through tier 5. Everybody is kind of got to do their part for it to work, but not everybody has the money for investment, potentially the sustainability teams, depending on how big the company is, right? So it's a really big conversation. It takes time. It takes time, money, energy, and resources to be able to do that. So let's look into your role at Blue Yonder. What does that entail? What are you working on? Because I'm pretty sure there's some really cool stuff in there.
Yeah, well, so I became the Chief Sustainability Officer in August of 2023. So coming up on 2 years in the role. And we talked about the impact of the supply chain on carbon footprints, for example. So about 60% of global carbon emissions are coming from supply chain. So we're very focused on how do we go after the addressable carbon emissions within the supply chain. We're also very focused on waste reduction because that's really key for our core customer bases. We have a lot of grocery customers, customers that are manufacturing different food products, a lot of fashion customers. That's where a lot of attention is around how do we mitigate some of the unnecessary waste that's occurring in those value chains. So we're really excited to be able to bring integrated solutions that are helping customers not only look at traditional supply chain metrics like service levels or time to service or cost, but also fold in visibility and measurement for carbon emissions and waste. And I think even more importantly, optimization. So you can set an inventory plan that is optimized to have the lowest waste footprint, carbon footprint, and it really helps those companies not just measure what happened, but really proactively design their supply chains to mitigate their future footprint.
Well, and kind of get excited about it.
Yeah. And it is exciting because I think once you have the data and visibility to make those integrated decisions, then it's not, seen as an isolated thing for just the sustainability team to be going after. You can empower your entire organization to have that visibility and to have that integrated decision making.
Yeah, and I truly believe most people, especially supply chain professionals, really want to, like, they have good intentions, right?
Yes.
They
Yes.
really want to be able to contribute. They want to be able to make an impact. And they want to be able to do that not only within their teams, but also with the partners that they're working with and all that kind of stuff. And so I want to ask you, like, what is the biggest sustainability challenge that you like that you're seeing in supply chain right now? Like, what's your take on where we actually are as an industry? Because sometimes I feel like some of the big goals we were talking about a couple of years ago have dropped off the radar a little bit when it comes to the conversation that I'm seeing front and center from the conversations I'm having on the ground, maybe at conferences, conversations I'm having within the podcasts and the live shows and all of that kind of stuff. There was a big push for 2030, but now I don't really hear so much about that. And so where are we at?
No, it's a great question. And I think sometimes especially when it's a longer term goal like that. Like, what are we doing by 2030? What are we be doing by 2050? It's hard to measure our progress towards those longer goals. So I think in terms of biggest challenges, I'll go back to what we were talking about a bit earlier around just the influence to tier one, tier two, tier suppliers. A lot of our customers don't necessarily have that full network visibility. They probably have direct relationships, procurement relationships, and engagement with their immediate suppliers. But all of those indirect partners, whether it be up and down the value chain, they don't have both the visibility but also the tools to influence their actions. So that's a big one, is how do we use, in our case, technology to bring about all of the visibility that you need and the ways to kind of track and improve the performance of all of those in-tier suppliers. That's a big one. The other is just how do we change sustainability from being an isolated part of the business to empowering all of those different teams, the transportation managers, the inventory planners. How do we give them the right visibility to understand how the day-to-day decisions they're making could influence those company-wide goals? So again, technology is a really powerful way to do that. You can measure in real time how a transportation rerouting can influence the goal that you've been set around carbon emission reduction. You can also see, is that going to change the service level time or the cost associated with that trip? So you're really empowering your teams to act in a more sustainable way.
Yeah, and I think the other component is kind of shame, right? I feel like
Say
the
more about
companies,
that.
well, the companies and the organizations make these like goals for 2030 and they make a big deal about it. And then if they're not necessarily going to hit it, they go quiet because there's a lot of shame around the fact that we made a big deal about 2030 and now we may or may not hit it. And so if we just go quiet, nobody's going to remember. But I think what we really have to empower each other, not only in industry, but in business as well, is the fact that everybody is learning. There's new things
Mm.
that are coming up every single day. And I think we've got to give, you know, some things a little bit of grace to be able to say, hey, we want to do this by 2030. That is our goal. But also give some grace when it's like, you know, 2025 and they're like, you know, we might be about 10 years away because we just haven't been able to figure this out. Or we figured it
Mm.
out to this far, but we're having trouble with the middle part or maybe the last part. You know, where we can enable conversations to that it's okay that we create these goals, but then we might not necessarily hit it. We have to move that goalpost a little bit. You know what I'm saying?
I think that's right. And another thing that I'll point to in terms of how mature sustainability has gotten over the years, it used to be very common that companies would put a line in the sand, like we're going to, be carbon net zero by
Right.
2030. And now we also have external frameworks and organizations that are reinforcing that accountability. So,
Hmm.
one is the Science Based Target Initiative, where you go through a third party process that says, okay, you want to have this goal by 2030. Do you actually have the plans in place in order to achieve that goal? Are you investing in the right areas to match, the ambition that you've stated?
Hmm.
And it's putting more scientific rigor behind some of the goal setting process, and it's also creating that reinforced accountability for companies that want to be leaders in that space. So, what we're hearing from our customers is not only do they have the public facing goals, but they also are working through these third parties, whether it be the Carbon Disclosure Project, the Science Based Target Initiative, to really create that third party reinforcement that the goals are actually real.
And I think that's totally what's needed,
Yeah.
right? In the fact that we may or may not have had that framework at the time that they made these big, hairy, audacious goals of 2030. You know what I mean? And I think we have to have the right tools and technology to be able to do that, but then also remember that everybody's learning. So, what do you think are the areas then of opportunity? Like where should businesses be focusing? What's your advice on how they can prioritize sustainability in 2025, but also take strategic action? Because I think that's another part of this, right?
Mm.
Sometimes we set priorities and sometimes we want to, and then economies shift, right? You know, some of that budget shifts and sometimes that action gets a little bit reduced. So, what can people take strategic action on today and what should they be prioritizing?
So some of the things that I'm excited about are, we know as supply chain professionals how interconnected all the different parts of the supply chain are. But the
Mhm.
reality is that companies have still been dealing with supply chain activity in an isolated way. So they may think about warehouse management and they have whole teams that are focused on that. They may have procurement teams that are operating independently of these organizations. So, one of the things that I'm excited about is really the power of technology to bridge all the different gaps in a truly connected supply chain so that we don't have to think about things in isolation.
Mhm.
And there's so many examples from a sustainability perspective where you may be making a well-intended decision around maybe you're trying to reduce packaging because you have a goal around reducing plastic or improving your packaging performance. But then you see later in your warehouse or in your inventory plans that you have package or you have product waste because the packaging has failed and all of a sudden you have inventory that you have to dispose of. But the procurement team that made the packaging decision doesn't have visibility today into that future
Right.
waste. So within that singular platform where you can see how am I performing as an organization and seeing where decisions ripple through that value chain, that provides incredible visibility. So that's something I'm really, really excited about. The other is AI. I mean, we can't have a conversation without touching on the benefits of AI. One of the things that is really compelling is there's so much data out there, right? But the data isn't always actionable or useful. From an inventory planning perspective, using AI, I'll take a grocery example where you're looking at seasonality, weather, maybe there's a holiday, there's buying practices of the consumer that can be isolated at the neighborhood level. There's so much data that can inform
Mhm.
your inventory plan. And through that intelligence, you can design a plan that has shelf availability balanced equally with waste reduction. So that's really exciting is how do we take all of the data, use AI to distill it into actionable insights?
Yes, I love that. That's the most exciting part, I think, too, because then,
Yeah.
like you said, we can reduce a lot of waste. I want to give a shout out to the brand Nix because I just saw somebody post this the other day. They're actually taking their returns, they're asking people to donate it to people in need.
Hmm.
And so I wonder if that AI component can not only help reduce waste, but if there is waste, give them an opportunity to, maybe give it to somebody in need before it actually gets to that point where we have to throw it out.
I'm glad you brought up returns because there's so much opportunity with returns. And, as we talked about, I came from retail and experience that, I was in footwear. Maybe a customer's buying a size 9, a 9.5, and a 10 because they're not exactly sure what's going to fit their
Right.
foot. But if you're not re-merchandising that inventory once it gets returned, then that can lead to inventory waste. So again, if you have a returns management solution that's connected with warehousing and your inventory management, then you can more seamlessly do that reverse logistics and put it back into inventory. And it's actually really common for brands not to have that. And the technology is there now that you can have more of a seamless process. And then you're avoiding a lot of inventory waste in the back end.
Yes, let's encourage no waste in returns.
Yes.
So now we've talked about how you worked across government, consumer, B2B. What has your experience been as a woman moving through those different spaces?
Hmm. I mean, maybe it's the companies that I've chosen, but I've had really wonderful experiences. And I was even in fashion, it was a lot of women that in leadership and we're running different parts of the business, whether it be our merchandising team, marketing team, executives, their CFO, all were women. So I've definitely been a part of organizations where I had great role models in women in leadership that were not only giving me proof that it's possible, but mentoring and being very generous with their time. The other thing that's really interesting, I'd be curious to see if this is true for the people that you've been interviewing, but there's a lot of women in sustainability. And I think a lot of us are drawn to,
Mhm.
how do we bring the love and the passion that we have to the new practice of sustainability. So I do find that a lot of my peers, other chief sustainability officers, are women. I'm part of several different groups that are sharing information, sharing best practices, learning from each other, going through some of these regulatory changes and not being competitive with each other, even if we're in competitive industries, but seeing that we can learn and really build and share that knowledge with each other.
Well, and I think that makes sense, right? We're inherent collaborators, and I think
Yes.
sustainability really means collaboration. I mean, in order for us to move things forward from a sustainability standpoint, we need to be working together, right? Departments need to be
Hmm.
working together, humans need to be working together, whether you're a consumer, whether you're a professional. There's a lot of work to be done, and we each have our own part to play in that. And so, yeah, I think that makes sense that there's a lot of women in sustainability. It's funny. So at the beginning of every year, I ask my audience to pick a sustainable development goal for the year and
Nice.
just take little actions. It doesn't even have to be every day, once a month, whatever that looks like, but take little actions towards that sustainable development goal instead of a New Year's resolution. Because I feel like New Year's resolutions are kind of so negative. At least
Yes.
with a sustainable development goal, they can work towards something that's going to make a difference and make an impact. So
I
I just
love
wanted to
that.
throw that out there.
Yeah. And it's a goal about like, what do we want to be doing more of versus what do we want to be doing less of? And I
Yeah.
think that's a really good way, a positive way to reinforce sustainable practices is like, yes, there are things that you can sacrifice and give up, but there's so much around how do we contribute and be more of like a positive force.
Yeah, yeah. And so you just mentioned mentorship as you sort of moved through the different stages of your career. Did you have one, like a mentor, a sponsor? And what did they like? How did that come about? What did they do for you? Did they help make introductions? Did they guide you? Talk to us a little bit about that because I think there's a lot of questions around mentorship and sponsorship, and I think it's really good for our audience to hear that.
Yeah. So I would say I've had very many informal mentors and sponsors that have helped me along the way, whether it be a peer, like I mentioned, our chief sustainability officer group, where we're sharing information and learning from them, even in completely different industries. And I think that's one of the most effective learnings that I can get is I'm not always talking with other supply chain sustainability professionals. I have friends that are working in aerospace and working at airports. I have friends that are working in manufacturing,
Mhm.
and they have a completely different lens to how we approach sustainability. And I think that kind of crowdsourcing of knowledge across different industries, since sustainability is such a holistic practice, is really beneficial. But the way that I've approached, more official mentorships in the past is if you see someone who you really respect, either how they're approaching maybe a challenge, as they're getting resistance, they need to be proving their case because that's a lot of sustainability is how do you prove your ROI? How do
Yeah.
you get someone to change their behavior? How do you have that power of influence? Just asking them to coach you on a particular project because it can be a little bit intimidating to say, hey, do you want to be my mentor? And that could be a 5-year assignment for them, or they may
Right.
feel like it's a big task. But if you have something really specific, like I saw how you handled XYZ and you were able to change and get investment behind a project that you wanted, I have this major thing that I'm coming up against where I need to have our executives sign off on something. Can you coach me through this particular project? And then you can kind of learn from someone on a really isolated basis. It gives you something really tangible to work on with them. And then you can also say like, okay, this is only a month engagement, or it has an
Yeah.
isolated time frame, so it's not necessarily going to be a huge burden to them in the long run.
I think that's a great point. I think it's really about asking specific, pointed, good questions around
Mm-hmm.
what it is that you're actually looking for from someone. Because if it's just open-ended, it can be a little bit overwhelming, especially if that professional has, a busy professional life, or maybe they have both busy personal and professional, and they really want to help, and you put them in a really bad spot because
Yeah.
they feel like they have to say yes, and we don't want to do that to anybody. And so I think the art of really good questions, but being pointed to something specific that you need help around, I think is
Yes.
really, really great advice. Do you have someone who's been a big inspiration to you, either personally or professionally?
I mean, so many. I think the first woman that I met who was a chief sustainability officer, her name was Hannah Jones. She was the CSO at Nike, and she happened to be, and she was very much an informal mentor to me because I never asked her to have an official relationship. But she was on the board of directors when I was at Method. So we would have good engagement with our board. We would see them frequently. And she was very accessible in terms of coaching our sustainability team on challenges that we were having. But I think just seeing that it was possible at the time, CSO was still a really rare position. I think she
Right.
was one of the first. Hearing about her trajectory, it was incredibly inspiring to me. And then also just being able to have that kind of early coaching around what does it mean to have that kind of Nike level sustainability programs in place, some of the challenges that she's come across. She inspired a lot of creativity in how our team approached sustainability and really pushed the boundaries of the questions we were asking and the way that we framed our program. So she was an incredible influence.
I love that. I giggled at the beginning because it's such a crazy question, right? Especially if you've had a career as long as we have. There's so many people who have
So
influenced
many.
our career
Yes.
in so many different ways. It's hard to pinpoint sort of one person, but I appreciate you sharing with you that with me and the audience because I think it's important to showcase what that informal relationship can look like.
Mm-hmm.
And then it
Yes.
doesn't have to necessarily have a label. I'm a big proponent of, labels can sometimes get in the way. And the fact that you were able to put together your program and at least have aspirations to a certain level of program that you wanted to leave as your legacy in that organization that she was
Mm.
able to help you with.
Absolutely. And I get contacted by people that are younger in their career on LinkedIn, or people will reach out to me through a friend. They want to get some guidance around what does it mean to develop a career in sustainability. And I think it's still a little bit uncharted, but at the same time, there's so much opportunity. And I would say like the biggest piece of advice I get I give is that sustainability isn't just one thing. If you have a specialty, maybe it's packaging engineering or transportation management or inventory planning, you can fold sustainability as a passion and as a knowledge framework into those specialties.
Yeah.
So, if anyone's listening who's kind of thinking about how they might pursue their own sustainability path, I would say think about that integrated approach where you can bring a skill set or a strength that you have, or maybe a background that you have with sustainability folded in.
I love that. I always talk about, think about what you like to do, what you don't like to do, what you're good at, and what you're not good at. And
Yeah.
there's some intersectionality between those. And then, you can apply that to sustainability or whatever it is, maybe accounting, something that you're passionate about and sort of figure out your career trajectory of how you want to get there. Now, you
Mm,
were recognized as a trailblazer at the Women in Supply Chain Awards.
thank
Congratulations.
you.
What does being a trailblazer mean to you, and why is it so important to spotlight the women who are driving the industry forward?
Yeah, I mean, I would just underline what we had been talking about around representation, right? If you see
Matter.
women who are in the space that you aspire to, or in a field, or even in supply chain, there's still a lot of men that are leaders in supply chain, but you see women represented and you see leaders and the type of leaders that you would want to be working with and eventually become, then that becomes a guide force for you. So I think it's important to spotlight and to do the work, frankly, that you're doing, telling these stories, because once you hear about trajectories and how people have approached it, then it becomes much more accessible for you. So I think the representation is critical. And also just up and down mentorship. I continue to have mentors that are further along in their career or maybe in other dimensions. And I continue to try to bring people through sustainability. We need more people, right? We need more people who are thinking about how they can fold sustainability into their practice, in their work. And so the more that I can inspire other people to think about how they can contribute to these bigger causes that need to be acted on, the more powerful that we can be.
Yeah, and every action matters, right? The awards matter, the series matters, the work that you're doing as a mentor to guide people into sustainability, if that's their passion, right? The work that we do on the Blended podcast and with the Blended Pledge to get diverse voices on industry stages. Like, it
Wonderful.
doesn't have to be a huge thing. It could be a $5 donation to Blended Pledge. It could be a 5-minute conversation where you're inspiring somebody to get into sustainability. It could be a 30-minute conversation like this one about your journey to showcase what's possible. And so I think every action matters. So,
Mm.
last question, and I hate to wind this down because I love this conversation. But what does the future hold for you?
Well, one thing kind of near future that we're really excited about is finally releasing new products from Blue Yonder focused on the sustainable supply chain. So that's really something I've been since I came in around 18 months ago. We created this vision. What does it look like to have integrated sustainability and supply chain management? Now we're at the point where we can actually bring that to customers.
Cool.
So the biggest inspiration for me to come to Blue Yonder and what we're doing is how do we scale impact across the thousands of global supply chains that we're helping to influence today? So I'm really excited not only to roll out that product, but also to start have measurable carbon reduction and waste reduction benefits coming through that. So we see that as being an incredible change agent in how companies can better manage all the different kind of challenges and problems that we talked about, and being able to approach that in a much more integrated way.
Love that. You are a real fountain of knowledge and such an
Thank
incredible
you.
example, not just for women in supply chain, but for businesses looking to do better, when it comes to sustainability efforts in 2025. And I can't wait to see how you continue to make your impact and your footprint with Blue Yonder. So, did you have a guess at today's big question? Well, at the top of the show, I asked you, according to a total economic impact study by Forrester, what percentage could implementing sustainability focused supply chain actions reduce labor costs for supply chain sustainability management? Well, it's a huge 70%, higher than even I was expecting, I think. So, sustainable practices really are key across businesses in so many different ways. Saskia, thank you so much for joining me here for our Woman in Supply Chain series on Let's Talk Supply Chain.
Thanks so much, Sarah. I love talking with you.